Hey everyone, Lotan here. Welcome back to the channel, KJV Pictures. We're going to be doing something a little bit different today. I wanted to show you some of the behind-the-scenes action on what it takes to make one of these animated videos. I know a lot of times when people think about computer-animated videos, they think maybe you draw a few pictures here and there and the computer kind of does the rest for you. As you'll see today, that is not the case. And maybe you're thinking about making some animated videos yourself, which I highly encourage. The more of us out here doing the same thing, but appealing to different people with your own creativity, I think the better. We need to spread the gospel message as much as we can. And others just might be interested in what it takes. So some of the art that you guys don't see that goes on behind the scenes. So let's get started today. We're going to start with what I'm best at, and that is character designs. So let's take a look at some character designs.
Here we go!
All right. So here you guys can see we got some sketches. This is what I like to start with. Actually, I'm wrong. Let's turn back the clock just a little bit. The first thing to start with is the script.
Here we go!
This can be a little bit daunting because you have a blank page in front of you. So what are you going to make the video on? What are you going to say? Sometimes this can just flow out, but other times you need to study. And so this process, writing the script, could take a day. It could take several days. It's really depending on how familiar you are with what you're trying to tell, and sometimes just things flow out easier than others. So once you have the script done, now let's move forward again. So I like to start with character designs because that's what I'm good at. When I worked professionally, that's what I did. So you can see here on the screen we've got a few character designs. Some of these you did not see originally, and this is something to note on character designs, but also just general video making in general, is that oftentimes you'll start with a lot and you have to narrow down the process. So here you can see I started with more characters. I was going to have a scene with the thieves on the cross on either side of Jesus. I ended up cutting that out, and it's for the best, really. A rule of thumb is to, when you start out, put out all your ideas and then start taking things away until you take too much away. Until the last thing that you took away makes the video suffer in a certain light, or the character design suffer in a certain light, and then you've gone too far, so you add that bit back, and you've got a minimalistic character or a minimalistic video, but it has all the oomph. None of the bells and whistles, so to speak. So, how do I get here? So this can take. This is a process. Here are some of the designs that I did not use. I was really just trying to discover the look of what I was going to do. I had a general idea. I like to have each animation sort of have its own style. It won't always be like that, but for now, I think changing the style depending on what you're trying to say can add a lot to the video that you're trying to make. So once I actually do, and I think the first character that I did that I actually liked was one of these guards. I can't remember which one. And then from there I fit the other characters to kind of stay in the same world, the same universe as the guards. So once you have the characters down, then you have to go back to the script that you wrote and make some storyboards.
Here we go!
And this is important because this is going to tell you what you have to draw. What backgrounds are you going to need? What angles of the characters are you going to need? So here you can see with Jesus here, we have a 3/4. We have a back 3/4, even though you can only see his head, the back of his head. That's another angle. Here would be his front. And usually storyboards would be a lot more detailed than this when you're working with a team, because you need to pass on information to the next person, but because I'm doing it all myself, I can get away with doing a lot less. And as you'll see from some of the storyboards, that doesn't all match the finished product. And that's just because the storyboards for me are a starting off point. If you're working in a professional production, these would need to be solidified, approved, and you can't really make any changes after that. But because it's just me, and I'm sort of winging it sometimes, I can make changes here and there. Okay, once you have the storyboards done, we're going to go back to character designs and we're going to draw different angles of some of the characters that we need. So like I mentioned, with Jesus, we would need more than one angle. So I drew a rough turnaround, so I just have a general idea of what different angles for the character looks like. I did the same thing for the main character, because we see more than one angle of him. And then I also did some poses for the guards, and any other sort of pose that I might need to draw, so I can kind of make the animation process a lot easier, rather than just get stuck while I'm animating. So once this is all done, the next step is to go back to your storyboards and look at all the backgrounds that you need. What angles of the backgrounds do you need? Even close-ups would need a background that's drawn differently than your main background, because you can't just blow up, like zoom in on a background and keep the same sort of line quality. So every angle, every zoom sort of needs its own background. So I make a list of the different backgrounds that I need, and then I start drawing them.
Here we go!
You can see the finished backgrounds that I made will be here. We have the back of the cross. This is when Jesus gets nailed to the cross. This was a concept of an image of what it would look like. But I did do the, like the general sky. I painted that as the background. The cell door. I think this was the first background I did that really solidified the style. And I'll show you what I mean, because I, it took a few days experimenting with how I was going to paint the backgrounds. So then, yeah, we needed, this is when Jesus appears. We needed an angle for that. This is when he's looking at his hands. This is the main shot of the dungeon. This is for a close-up shot, another close-up shot. When he's looking out the window, the moon. This was the first moon. It changed a little bit from the final. This was just a concept image of what I might do. This also changed from the final. And here we have the tomb. So, oh, and of course the when Jesus is at the stake being whipped. So, what does it take to make a background image? Well, let's start with this door one. So, this would be a good example. First, we start with just a sketch, and you can see it's pretty rough, but I think I had a rougher sketch than this originally, and then I went over it once more, kind of defining things here, because the next step is to make the final lines, and when you make final lines, you're actually going to be zoomed up. Sometimes, even this close up when you're drawing, and so you kind of want to have everything sketched out for you at this stage, so you don't have to think too much when you clean up. And so that's what I would do. I would draw this sketch. I would, and when I say cleaned up, I just mean do the final line pass. So then I lower the opacity, and I would meticulously go in and draw the final lines over top. And if we take the sketch down, you can see this would be the final lines that you actually see in the animation. So the next step is to paint this, and you start with the base colors. So here you can see I start with just putting the base colors in, and then I know the main feature of what's really going to make this background pop is going to be the flame. Now the flame I'm going to animate in a separate program called After Effects. I'm not going to show you guys how to animate in this. I'm just going to show you what goes behind the process of animating. So I draw in a shine where I know the flame's going to be. And this shine actually, if you look in the finish animation, wiggles around a little bit. So I do animate that in After Effects. The next thing to do is, what I'm trying to do with this style of background is make as minimal lines as possible and then really accentuate the features with paint. And so you'll see the first layer of shadow really tells you that this is stone, that this is rock. I mean, sure, you can kind of tell just like that. Yeah, it's stone, it's rock, but here I feel like this really makes it pop. And I go and I do one last set of darker shadows, as you can see as I turn that on and off, to really just, define that these are large stones. I do the same thing on the door. I add some shadows, taking into effect where the light source is coming from. So this area is lighter than this area. And then what really makes it pop is the rim lighting of what the flame does on the stone. So that is the different steps of designing a background. But one thing I will show you all is, once again, I'll show you that I started with a sketch. And this is a good example of how, like with the temple, I had a really rough design, but even before cleaning up, I needed to tighten this up so that when I do clean up, more of it is defined for me and I don't have to think too much. So once I have the sketch, I go in, I do the exact same thing, and you come up with a finished product. But as you'll see in the final animation, this scene sort of moves into place. So everything is drawn on its own layer, and I have to also draw what exists behind that layer. So you can see here, even though you don't see the full sky in the final image, you still have to draw that stuff in there. And the ground is its own image, the temple is its own image, and this column is also its own image. So that is how I do my backgrounds, and as you saw, there was quite a bit of backgrounds for this, even for some scenes that only appeared on screen for a second or two. So next up is the actual animation process.
Here we go!
Okay, so I use Adobe Animate to do my main animations. Let's just take this one for an example. I think this is a good example to show you sort of the process of what it takes to animate something on the computer using Adobe Animate. And there are shortcuts that you can do, but you lose quality when you do those shortcuts. So this is how I like to do it, but it's not necessarily how I would do it for every scene or every animation. It really depends on the style that you're going for. Okay, so for this scene, I start with a rough. And I draw in all these lines, and I animate in a way that's called pose-to-pose animation. So pose-to-pose is you draw one pose, and then you draw the pose that you want to end up at. So let's say right there, right? And then, once I get those two poses, I come in and I draw the in-between poses. And I take certain things into account. Like one might think that going from this to that, you kind of just go in a straight line. But one of the rules of animations is most things move in arcs. And so you'll see the character actually looks down slightly and then to the side. And that's an arc that he's moving in. So I do that, I go back here, and do the same thing. So I know I start here, I want to end up here. But another rule of animation is something called anticipation. And you'll notice in some of the old Roadrunner cartoons, when a character wants to run in a certain way or in a certain direction, they first wind up and sort of move in the opposite direction. So here you can see, even though the head moves down, first I move the head up. It goes up and then down. So that would be what's called anticipation, and that's another principle of animation. And it's hard to tell here, but if you look at the mouth also moves in an arc. The head doesn't just go straight down, it moves in a sort of an arc. So you can see that there. And we'll come back in, do another pose just from here to here. This one was very straightforward. But you'll see another principle of animation is what's called secondary motion. So when the head moves, the hair would be animated a little bit separately. So you can see it follows through. It has its own sort of physics, but it's directed by the main movement of the head. So those are just some principles. A lot of people skip this and they don't do it in their final animations, and that's fine. It really depends on what style and what look you're going for. So not all animations need to be as elaborate. And then I have him open his eyes. So once I have this in, I do the same thing as I did to the backgrounds, and I clean up the lines. So here you'll see I have the final lines. And once again, I go through and every single scene that you see down here that has a keyframe is a new, fresh drawing. And another thing to point out is, because I know some things overlap, I have them on separate layers. So I have the head base on one layer, the mouth is on its own layer, the cheeks are on its own layer, the eyes are on their own layer, and even things like, turn the mouth back on, even things like the bangs would be on its own layer, because later on the bangs actually cover up a lot of the head. So once I have all of this down, those final lines, then I go in and I paint and I fill in the color. So that's actually, I moved forward a little bit too fast. One step that I forgot to mention is coloring.
Here we go!
Before I even start animating, I do some color designs. And here you can see these, I take the rough characters, just those rough sketches that you saw in the beginning, and I paint in on top of the background that I've already done. I sort of blur out the background, and then noting the colors is what I'm basing the designs of the coloring of the characters. So here, as you can see, the Centurion Guard, because it's a kind of a green scene, his skin is a little bit greenish, while here you can see all the skin is pink, and if that same guard was placed in this background, I would color the skin pink here. So I go through and I design or I fill in the colors of what the character is going to look like, so that when we go back to our animation and I start painting, I don't have to think about what colors I'm going to paint everything. And as you can see, I use the same colors that I've already picked out, and I start animating. One thing is, you'll see like his shadows. Those are also animated frame by frame. Everywhere you see a keyframe, it's a new. I'm going through and I'm looking at the last drawing that I did, and I'm trying to match where the shadow would fall. And so all these are things to consider when you're painting, and then add in the background, and you get your final animation. Pretty simple, right? Okay, well that's just one scene. Now you have to do it for every scene that you have in your scene, and once all of that is done, now you add effects. Not effects, but FX. So, I use After Effects for that. Let's open up After Effects. Okay, so now we're in After Effects, and some of the things that I'll add in After Effects once I finish the animation is things like, you see the light on his head right here? This, I don't paint that in, I add that in After Effects, so that when he moves, it sort of stays. This is the stuff that the computer can do. Once you have to fool around with the settings for it, obviously, so sometimes if you don't know the settings, you have to go on YouTube, you have to watch tutorials, which takes time. But this is something that I'll add in After Effects, and I'll also add, as you can see, the shadow on the wall here as he moves. That is also done in After Effects. So this is what After Effects is really good for, just putting the finishing touches on a scene. A really good example is when Jesus is in the sky. Let's open up that scene. Okay, so this is just a little thing that I did in After Effects that I think really makes this scene pop. And this is the final scene that you guys see. This is what it looks like. But if I turn off the effects, you'll see, this is actually what I animated. Right? So that's what I animated. And then I came into After Effects, and using the program for what it's good at, I added this sort of outer glow, which really makes it look like he's in front of the sun. And the computer, After Effects, will sort of follow the movement of the edge of the drawing. So that is the next step. After I animate, I come into After Effects and I add in glows, shadows, any sort of effects, FX, that you see in the scene. So the last step, after you do that for every scene that you have, is to edit it all together in Premiere.
Here we go!
So I've already edited the video. All this sort of movement that you see here, this was done in After Effects. So see how the things, all the different, like the objects and the characters, they all sort of slide into the scene. This was done in After Effects. Even though the individual movement here was animated in Flash, or in Adobe Animate, it used to be called Flash. So these were animated in Animate. Then I went into After Effects and I added like the shadows and the ground, as you can see. And then I edited it together in Premiere, where you see here like all these fading from one thing to another. This is all done in Premiere, and I'm doing it to the audio, to the sound. I do all that in a different program, edit the sound together. I use, what do I use? Let's see, these are all my Adobe programs. I use Adobe Audition to edit my sound.
Here we go!
And that's really nothing, there's nothing really to show there unless I was doing a tutorial. So once I have my sound, I have all my animations. The sound kind of comes first before I start animating, so I know the timing of my animations. But then I edit it all together in Premiere, which you can see now, and I add things like sound effects. So in this scene, every time they whip, you will actually hear just slightly a whipping sound. Let's see if we can hear it. Beaten and whipped. So this sort of sound is all done here in After Effects. Same with the nails on the cross. You can see these sound bars down here. Every time the hammer hits is when that sound appears. Nailed to a cross. So that is done here in After Effects. And once that is done, the very last thing to do is design a thumbnail and load it onto YouTube.
Here we go!
And you can see that some of my videos have copyright claims. That is just because of some of the music that I use in the background. And luckily, because my channel is not monetized, which means if you see any commercials on the videos, that is YouTube putting those up and they make money, but I do not make any money off of these videos except for what you guys donate. And I'm very thankful to you. It's because of you all that I can keep doing this. So yeah, I think all of that hopefully gives you guys a better idea of what it takes to make some of these videos and why it might take sometimes up to 2 months to make a video. To be fair though, it doesn't actually take 2 months. It takes maybe a month and a half, but I have another channel called Last Call. If you have not checked out that channel, take a look. I put up long form sermons on there with all the verses on the screen so that if you don't have your Bible or you're sharing it with somebody, all the verses are there for you. It's really good. Really easy way to study as well. If you go back to a sermon and you remember something that you heard, you can kind of just scroll through, see where the text pops up, and then you can start taking notes. So that is why it takes so long. Not every animation does take this long. The next few animations that I plan on doing won't be full-blown animations with backgrounds and stuff. And it really all depends on what I'm trying to say. And that determines the quality of the animation. So yeah, I don't know if this is a video that you guys will enjoy, but I wanted to just put it out there. If you do want to see more videos like this, then leave a comment, let me know, and then maybe in the future, while I'm making videos, I can update you all with some progress videos. Or maybe you don't want to see any of these types of videos or what goes into making the videos, you just want to see the final product, and that's fine too. Just leave me a comment to let me know. And yeah, that's it for this video. Everyone, thank you for supporting this channel. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for donating. If you have donated to the channel, I don't take the time to personally thank you through an email, because really that kind of stuff is between you and God, and between God and me. But please know that I am very grateful and I thank God for you all. My new video should be up in a few weeks, maybe a month. Until then, like, share, subscribe, check out the Last Call channel, and I'll see you in the next video.